To say the greatest character I ever met in my life, and I've met a lot, was Jinky Johnstone.
Really? Jinky?
I named the dog after him.
Jimmy Johnstone never needed to tell his Celtic teammates how good he was. They faced him every day. At 5'4", Jinky looked almost harmless beside the bigger men of Scottish football. Then the ball reached his feet. Everything changed. Tommy Gemmell knew it better than most. He was strong, aggressive, and already proven against Europe's finest. Yet years later, Gemmell admitted, "I played against him in training and hated it." Johnstone's balance made him horribly difficult to read. He could draw Gemmell forward, wait for the slightest movement, then disappear the other way. Jim Craig remembered something beyond the skill: courage. Defenders could kick Jinky down, they could try to intimidate him, but Johnstone would get back up and demand the ball again. Kenny Dalglish saw that same combination. He arrived when Jinky was already a European champion. His verdict was unforgettable. The wee man had everything: unbelievable skills and the heart of a lion. These weren't supporters exaggerating an old hero. Gemmell and Craig had conquered Europe beside him. Dalglish would become a legend himself. They knew greatness when they saw it. And all three remembered something extraordinary in Jimmy Johnstone. But Celtic men loving Jinky was one thing. What came from Rangers legends was much harder to dismiss. Subscribe now as we uncover what football's greatest names really thought of the legends who made the game unforgettable.
Knocking upon his door, he became the one the fans adore. He had every...
Praise from Celtic teammates was expected. Praise from Rangers men meant something different. Derek Johnstone spent his career on the opposite side of Glasgow. He knew exactly what Jimmy Johnstone represented to Celtic. Yet when asked to describe Jinky, his verdict needed only one word: genius. Derek believed Jock Stein understood him perfectly. Give Jinky freedom. Let him attack. Let defenders worry about what came next. Craig Brown was just as certain. For years, Johnstone had been compared with Rangers winger Willie Henderson. Both were brilliant. Both played on the right. But Brown believed Jinky had something extra. He could beat a defender outside. He could cut inside. There was no safe direction to show him. And Willie Henderson knew that rivalry better than anyone. They competed for Scotland. They represented opposite halves of the old firm. Yet rivalry eventually became friendship. By the end of Johnstone's life, Henderson was no longer simply the Rangers man once compared with him. He was one of Jinky's closest old football friends. That told its own story. The rivalry could disappear. The respect never did. But admiration was about to become something more painful. Because when England's finest defenders actually had to stop Jimmy Johnstone, some discovered that knowing his reputation was no preparation for facing him. In 1970, Jimmy Johnstone faced one of the strongest teams in England, Leeds United, and waiting for him was England fullback Terry Cooper. Cooper was quick, experienced and difficult to beat. Jinky made his night miserable. Johnstone kept attacking him. Inside, outside, then back again. John Yogi Hughes remembered the damage clearly. Across the European Cup semi-final, he said Jinky destroyed Terry Cooper. Even Cooper would later joke about the experience. The famous line attributed to him captured the problem perfectly. "I would love to have kicked Jinky, but I couldn't get near him." Billy Bremner had watched it happen from the same Leeds side. His later assessment was extraordinary. He regarded Johnstone's display as one of the greatest exhibitions he had witnessed. But Leeds weren't alone. England defender Emlyn Hughes discovered the same problem. After facing Jinky for Scotland, Hughes remembered it brutally. "Jimmy Johnstone absolutely crucified me. Different defenders, different matches, the same memory. They couldn't control him, and sometimes they couldn't even get close enough to stop him." But Jinky's reputation wasn't confined to Britain. Soon, one of football's most intimidating arenas would begin applauding the man who had come there to beat them. Jimmy Johnstone had already conquered Europe with Celtic. Then came Madrid. In 1967, Celtic travelled to the Bernabeu for Alfredo Di Stefano's testimonial. It should have belonged entirely to Di Stefano. Instead, Jinky began stealing the show. He ran at Real Madrid again and again. Every touch seemed to invite another defender. Every challenge created another escape. Soon something remarkable happened. The Madrid crowd began shouting, "Ole!" They were applauding an opposition player. Real goalkeeper Andres Junquera never forgot him either. Years later, his memories placed Johnstone among the finest players he had encountered, and the wider football world agreed. That year, Jinky finished third in the Ballon d'Or, ahead of Franz Beckenbauer, ahead of Eusebio, ahead of George Best. Jimmy Johnstone was no longer simply Celtic's little winger. Europe knew his name, but behind that brilliance was a player who could be difficult to predict, and one man understood better than anyone how to handle him. Jock Stein knew Jimmy Johnstone could not be managed like everyone else. Jinky was brilliant, but he was also unpredictable. Stein learned how to use both. Before Celtic faced Red Star Belgrade, Jinky's fear of flying became a problem. Stein offered him an extraordinary incentive: build a big enough lead at home, and he wouldn't have to travel for the return. Johnstone responded spectacularly. Celtic won 5-1. Jinky scored twice and helped create the rest.
I was standing there and Jimmy all of a sudden just run by me, never seen me, right out through the door. And I shouted, "Jinky!" Never heard me. He'd just been freed.
Bertie Auld knew this other side of him well. Behind the fearless winger was a nervous, mischievous man. Someone who could make teammates laugh, then terrify defenders minutes later. Bobby Lennox saw that vulnerability before Lisbon. Jinky worried about the great Inter Milan players they were about to face, but once the final began, the nerves disappeared. That was Stein's challenge. He didn't need to teach Johnstone how to play. He needed to get the best from a genius who lived partly on instinct. At Celtic, Stein managed to do it. With Scotland, the story became far more complicated. Jimmy Johnstone conquered Europe with Celtic. Yet his Scotland career remained strangely incomplete. He won only 23 caps. For a player of his ability, the number still looks remarkable. Tommy Docherty had seen that ability up close. One famous recollection told of a Scotland training session where Jinky became almost impossible to dispossess. But international football never consistently saw Celtic's version of Johnstone. There were still unforgettable moments. Against England in 1966, he scored twice at Hampton. Then came 1974. During Scotland's World Cup preparations, Jinky ended up drifting out to sea in a rowing boat at Largs. The story became national news. Days later, he answered in typical fashion. Scotland beat England 2-0. Yet at the World Cup itself, Johnstone never played a minute. He travelled to West Germany. He remained on the bench. Years later, Gordon Strachan represented another generation touched by Jinky. Strachan had grown up admiring him. Eventually, at Dundee, he actually shared a dressing room with his childhood hero. That was Johnstone's strange international legacy. Scotland never fully captured his genius. But Scottish football never stopped producing players who wanted to be like him. And when the football finally disappeared, the quality people remembered most was not a trick. It was his courage. Sir Alex Ferguson remembered something deeper than Jimmy Johnstone's skill. He remembered what happened after defenders kicked him. Jinky got back up. Then he wanted the ball again. Ferguson later used Johnstone as an example of extraordinary courage. For him, that refusal to hide was part of what made Jinky different. A defender could hurt him, but frightening him was another matter. It was a quality Johnstone would need long after the cheering stopped. In 2001, he was diagnosed with motor neurone disease. The illness slowly attacked the body that had once carried him past defenders with such ease. The balance disappeared, the strength began to fade, but the fighting spirit remained. Bertie Auld stayed close to his old friend. He accompanied Jinky through some of the most difficult moments of his illness. And what Auld remembered was not bitterness. Jinky still believed he could fight it. For those who had played beside him, that must have felt painfully familiar. They had watched defenders knock him down for years. They had watched him climb back to his feet, and they had watched him ask for the ball again. This time, however, there was no defender to beat. Jimmy Johnstone died in 2006. He was only 61. Football responded with something greater than statistics. People remembered the man. Martin O'Neill spoke of Jinky's humility and consideration for others. Behind the European champion was someone who never seemed to forget where he came from. And Celtic supporters had already delivered perhaps the greatest verdict of all. In 2002, they voted Jimmy Johnstone the greatest Celtic player ever. Think about what that meant. Celtic had produced legendary captains, European champions, great goal scorers, heroes across generations. Still, the supporters chose Jinky. Perhaps Kenny Dalglish had explained why years earlier. The wee man had everything, unbelievable skills, and the heart of a lion. The skill made people watch. The courage made them remember. Jimmy Johnstone could make defenders look helpless. He could make the Bernabeu applaud an opponent, and he could leave fellow greats searching for words to explain what they had witnessed. But beneath all the tricks was something simpler: courage. The courage to demand the ball, the courage to attack again, and whenever football knocked him down, the courage to get back up. That is why, decades later, Jinky is still remembered. If you are one of the real fans who still remembers Jinky, subscribe now and keep his memory alive.